Today, we're diving into a massive, rapidly escalating David versus Goliath conflict right in the heart of the video game world. On one side, everyday gamers like us. On the other, massive publishers like PlayStation and Ubisoft. At the absolute core of this battle is a fight over digital rights, ownership, and whether the entire gaming industry is facing a huge paradigm shift. PlayStation and the broader gaming industry might have just lost everything when it comes to controlling the narrative around digital game ownership.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with a digital ownership crisis, move on to the Stop Killing Games movement, take a look at the corporate pushback and a fascinating conflict of interest, before wrapping it all up with a future of digital rights.
Section 1. The Digital Ownership Crisis, the transition from physical to digital media.
You know, for about 30 years, game ownership was pretty simple, right? You bought a cartridge or a disc, maybe you blew the dust out of it to get it to work, and it was yours, forever. But this whole transition to digital media has sparked massive consumer anxiety. People are seriously wondering, do we actually own our games anymore? Or are we literally just renting temporary licenses that a corporation can revoke at any second? Now, if you listen to the industry talking points, they'll tell you physical media is completely dead. But the source material we're looking at pushes back on that hard. Looking at Capcom's global-based game sales, the source points out that when you strip away digital-only add-ons like DLCs and expansions, the split outside the US is actually incredibly close to 50-50 between physical and digital. So that whole death of physical media narrative, the analysis suggests it's vastly overstated.
Yet, despite that super persistent demand for physical copies, major publishers are pushing incredibly hard toward an all-digital future. The source highlights some recent, highly controversial decisions by industry titans like Rockstar and Sony to just completely ditch physical discs for certain releases. And according to the commentary, this isn't just some random coincidence. Critics actually frame this as a highly coordinated effort by the industry to phase out physical media entirely. Why? Because an all-digital future gives publishers absolute, total control over distribution, pricing, and ultimately ownership.
Which brings us to Section 2. The Stop Killing Games movement, the grassroots consumer rights campaign.
So this aggressive push for digital control, it didn't go unnoticed. It actually sparked a massive, highly organized grassroots campaign. Gamers are banding together and basically saying, hey, if I pay for a product, I should have a reasonable expectation that it's not going to just vanish from my library on a corporate whim. And guys, this isn't just some tiny niche internet debate. The Stop Killing Games petition has literally gathered over 1 million signatures. 1 million. The source really emphasizes that this sheer volume is absolutely crucial. It's forcing the industry to finally look at the elephant in the room, because these companies are just getting overwhelmed by unified consumer voices across multiple jurisdictions. But what was the actual tipping point for all this mobilization? Well, the catalyst, as the source points out, was the shutdown of a game called The Crew by Ubisoft. Ubisoft essentially pulled the plug on the game's servers, which made the product completely unplayable, even for the people who paid full price for it. As you can imagine, that ignited an absolute firestorm. We're not just talking about angry tweets here. This led straight to class action lawsuits. The death of The Crew is now literally being framed by the source as the historical turning point that spawned this huge demand for digital rights legislation in the gaming space.
Section 3. The corporate pushback, how the industry lobby is reacting. Naturally, the massive corporate lobbying arms aren't just taking this lying down. They're actively pushing back, deploying advocates to shape the narrative and basically try to calm the legislative waters. The source zooms in on a specific legal expert here, Dr. Cecilia Ponton. In response to the movement, Dr. Ponton argued that creating digital rights legislation is, well, practically, technologically, and legally complicated. Her exact words were that there's a mismatch between what people might be calling for and what is possible. She's essentially suggesting that what gamers are demanding is fundamentally incompatible with how game architecture and IP laws currently work. So let's unpack this supposed mismatch, because it's a really crucial point. The source argues that publishers are kind of intentionally misunderstanding what gamers are actually asking for. See, industry advocates frame this debate as if gamers are demanding infinite server support, like asking companies to pay endless hosting costs forever, which, yeah, actually would be financially impossible. But here's the catch. That is not what the movement is asking for, at all. What gamers actually want are offline modes for previously online-only games, or just peer-to-peer support so they can host the games themselves. It's a massive difference.
Now for Section 4. A conflict of interest, uncovering the ties behind the expert opinion.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the massive twist the source presents. When an expert claims consumer rights are just too complicated to implement, the analysis suggests we should probably look closely at who exactly is making that claim. The source mapped out the professional background of Dr. Cecilia Ponton, who is the Director of Policy at Flux Digital Policy. And it reveals that Flux Digital Policy is actually a subsidiary intimately tied to Sony, the ESA, and VGE. If you don't know those acronyms, they are essentially massive publisher lobby groups. So the source argues this is a stark conflict of interest. It severely undermines the claim that these consumer demands are impossible, because the independent expert saying it's impossible has direct ties to the very PlayStation and publisher lobbies facing the public backlash.
So, this revelation leads us to a very direct and very important question. Is it really that complicated? According to the source, the answer is a resounding no. The argument here is that for the first 30 years of physical games, ownership wasn't complicated in the slightest. It's only being framed as super complicated now because acknowledging these consumer rights would force corporations to give up their absolute control over the digital ecosystem.
To prove it's really not that complex, the source points right back to those grounded demands. Think about it. Implementing a simple end-of-life offline patch for a game, or unlocking the ability for players to connect via peer-to-peer networks, that requires literally zero ongoing financial investment from the publisher once the patch is pushed. It completely bypasses the need for any endless corporate server hosting. Consumers aren't asking for the impossible here, right? They're just asking for practical, final step solutions.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about. The source provides a super concrete real-world example. The game Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League. This was a huge online-only title that frankly failed to keep an active player base. But instead of just letting the game completely die and disappear forever, the developers actually successfully added a post-launch offline mode. According to the analysis, this proves unequivocally that creating an offline contingency plan for an online game is highly achievable. The publisher just has to actually choose to dedicate the resources to do it.
Bringing us to our final section, Section 5, the future of digital rights, what this means for the industry moving forward.
So how are these massive companies reacting as the pressure continues to mount globally? Well, according to the source, publishers are resorting to some pretty aggressive defensive tactics. The analysis claims the industry is basically gaslighting consumers by calling really simple tech solutions impossible, all while completely dodging any direct public debate with the community. But maybe the most alarming tactic mentioned? The source alleges that companies, specifically pointing to Sony here, are attempting to implement fake digital store currencies. The reported strategy is that even if a consumer wins a refund, they get paid back in a locked digital currency instead of real money. That effectively traps your funds inside the corporate ecosystem forever. No way out.
But despite all these aggressive tactics and evasive maneuvers, the source notes that the industry is rapidly running out of places to hide. This Stop Killing Games movement, it is a full-blown global phenomenon now. As we speak, legal actions and lawsuits are mounting against major publishers in 6 different countries. That sheer volume of international legal scrutiny means companies can no longer just sweep this issue under the rug. It's way too big now.
Which really brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. The source paints a vivid picture of an industry at a massive crossroads, finally being forced to reckon with the consequences of its all-digital ambitions. Think about it. If publishers maintain the power to just unilaterally kill digital products you paid good money for and then trap your refunds in fake currencies, we have to ask, who truly owns the future of your media? Are we stepping into an era of digital serfdom? Or will these grassroots movements finally force legislation that protects us, the consumers? It's an absolutely fascinating conversation, and you can be sure we'll be keeping a very close eye on it.